This is Lauren Dunlap, Executive Director for Advocacy and Awareness for Immune Disorders Association, or AAIDA, in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I am happy to host this evening's webinar. AAIDA's mission is to provide support and advocate for the greater than 25 million Americans living with immune disorders. AAIDA works to promote research and create better awareness of immune disorders. This is AAIDA's first of 12 educational webinars for 2022. And this evening, I am proud to introduce Tanya Freirich, who is a registered dietitian, and will be discussing living well with lupus, a holistic approach. Tanya Freirich is a registered dietitian nutritionist based near Charlotte, North Carolina. She's the owner of a virtual private practice, the Lupus Dietitian, that primarily serves people with lupus, but also helps others living with immune conditions to balance their diet and healthy eating habits. Tanya Freirich completed her bachelor's degree and master's degree in clinical nutrition from New York University. Following graduation, she worked at New York Presbyterian Hospital in clinical nutrition before moving to outpatient nutrition counseling. With more than a decade of experience in nutrition, Tanya is well-versed in nutrition intervention for many diseases and conditions. She is passionate about education and collaboration with clients to find their personal path to health. For clients with lupus, she helps them regain control of their chronic illness from a nutritional standpoint and make dietary and lifestyle changes. This is helpful to reduce and eliminate flares, symptoms, and side effects. In addition to one-on-one nutrition counseling, Tanya enjoys speaking to lupus support groups and will be starting group wellness programs in the coming months. Thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to speak with everyone. So yes, today is topic living well with lupus, a holistic approach. So everyone knows, unfortunately, our bodies are not just a machine. We need to kind of handle all aspects of it. So it's not just diet, it's lifestyle, it's handling stress too. It all works together. And of course, working with your doctors too. So thank you again so much for having me. I'm so excited, and we'll get started. So first and foremost, a disclaimer. Y'all probably have heard this before, but the information in this webinar is for educational purposes only. It's not meant to diagnose or treat medical conditions or replace your usual medical care. Always consult with your healthcare practitioner for the most appropriate individualized medical care for you and before making any lifestyle or nutritional changes. We just want to keep everyone safe.
Tanya, I just want to make sure, can everybody see your slides? I just wanted to make sure. Can somebody type yes? You can see Tanya's slides in the question box.
Yeah.
Can you hear her? And confirm. Anybody? Let's see. Okay. Come on. Yep, all good here.
Yay, good, wonderful. All righty, so what are we going to cover tonight? First, I'll introduce myself, although Lauren, you've done an amazing job. Thank you. I really appreciate that wonderful introduction. We'll talk really briefly just about lupus in general. Then we'll talk about the basic nutrition. So obviously, if you're the one with lupus, it's important to eat well for you, but you probably live with loved ones or you eat with loved ones. So we want to make sure the things that help you can also be helpful for whoever is in your household. Healthy eating overall, as well as we'll briefly talk about what diets are really popular and out and about these days, the pros and cons of all of them. And then, of course, lastly, my recommendations for the sorts of things that everyone living with lupus or any sort of autoimmune diseases can really implement in their lives to feel better, to have more energy, a lot of benefits of these recommendations. So that's me. Hello again. So I am a registered dietitian. I do have more than a decade of experience providing nutrition counseling. I am also a person that lives with lupus. So this is near and dear to my heart. I speak from experience and I advocate for those that are newly diagnosed or have just been struggling to find what works for them, or just want to live healthier. And then, of course, all of this education, all of this information that I try to spread as much as possible is helpful for empowering others to make changes to not only feel better, but feel more educated in making other decisions or speaking more with their doctors. So let's talk about the types of lupus. There are 4 types of lupus. Of course, the first one most people have heard of, which is SLE. 70% of the people that have lupus have SLE. It's usually what people are referring to when they mean lupus. And unfortunately, it's very tricky. It can cause inflammation of multiple organs or organ systems, and it could be either acute or chronic. The second type here, B, cutaneous lupus, is the type that generally affects the skin. However, 2/3 of people with SLE or with lupus also develop some sort of skin manifestations of it. So there's quite a bit of overlap. Also, 40 to 70% of people with lupus will find that their disease is made worse by exposure to ultraviolet rays from sunlight or artificial light, particularly those skin manifestations. The third type, drug-induced lupus, thankfully, is something that can actually be resolved. It's mostly caused by just a few medications. It takes several months, up to years of a prescription, that prescription being continuous, before symptoms can appear. And then they usually resolve if your doctor is really good about figuring it out within 6 months of when you stop the medication. So thankfully, that is a temporary type of lupus. And then the last type is neonatal lupus, which usually affects the baby of a mother with lupus. So it's specific antibodies that are elevated after birth. Also, thankfully, usually resolves within the first 6 months with no lasting effects. Yeah, so let's keep going. The causes of lupus. There are many. So it's more of an interplay. I'm sure we've all made a recipe at some point, and if you have the 3 ingredients just sitting there, they don't do much. But if you put them in the right concoction or in the right order at the right temperature, then they do a lot more. So for lupus, we have these 3 ingredients. We have your genetics. It seems like that does play a big part in lupus. Here's some statistics that help you understand why. So if one identical twin has lupus, there's a 50% risk the other identical twin will have it. So they have exactly the same genetic code, and you're having a 50% risk of one having lupus as the other. But if it was 100% genetics, then it would just be, you've got an identical twin, one has lupus, the other has lupus. So there are other things that factor in. For the person that has lupus, there's a 1 to 5% risk that their child will have it. So pretty high, but thankfully also not 100%. The difference between childhood onset versus adult onset in terms of genetic component is, it seems as though for immediate, like 1st and 2nd degree relatives, childhood onset is more likely to happen, whereas it's less likely in those immediate relatives. So it seems like the childhood onset perhaps has a more of a genetic component than adult onset, which makes sense. There's just not that many things that could have happened either with your hormones or an environment in childhood onset versus adult onset. You have a lot more time. So the environmental, let's say, contributors. So it's not that you do one thing, it's going to cause lupus right away, but it certainly can contribute to it, would be infection, injury, trauma, stress. And all of those things not only are physical ones, but could be also, especially that trauma, could be emotional, mental trauma. Our bodies are all connected. So the mind really affects the body affects the mind. And lastly, hormones. So it's certainly a disease that really affects women more often than men. And they have noticed that in terms of when women have flares, there seems to be an increased risk of flare and disease activity during menstruation, pregnancy, and postpartum. Unfortunately, that piece of the puzzle doesn't seem to have been 100% solved yet, but it seems to be something that contributes to disease activity. So who does lupus affect? Who is unfortunately had the hormones and the genetics and the environment all interplay? It seems as though 9 out of 10 identify as women. So the hormones certainly are playing a part there. About 1.5 million Americans. Most people with lupus are diagnosed between the ages of 15 to 44 years old. It is 2 to 3 times more prevalent amongst African American, Hispanic or Latina, Asian American, Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander women than among white women. So this, unfortunately, lupus does seem to affect BIPOC women much more prevalently than Caucasian. And then 1 in 3 people with lupus have other autoimmune diseases. Unfortunately, anyone with an autoimmune disease present, oftentimes it comes with friends. So unfortunately, autoimmune diseases seem to just cluster in people. You have one, and then eventually you may have others. And very sadly, lupus is amongst the top 20 leading causes of death among women ages 5 to 64. So it is a serious disease and one that we should not take lightly. And if you have it or a loved one has it, definitely pay attention, see how your body, what causes increased disease activity, and obviously try to avoid those things. So symptoms of lupus. Lupus is sometimes called the great mimicker because it comes about and affects your body in such a multitude of ways that oftentimes doctors are a little confused. It takes a while to be diagnosed correctly because the symptoms pop up in different ways for different individuals as well. It's not such a cookie cutter disease. So the symptoms could be extreme fatigue, pain or swelling in the joints, swelling in the hands, feet, eyes, Raynaud's syndrome, headaches, low fevers, brain fog, those skin manifestations like rashes or sores. And then we have this figure, we're pointing at all the body parts, but you get some of the ideas there. Some of these, unfortunately, may not have symptoms, but they're listed.
Tanya, right quick
Sure.
on that slide.
Yeah.
Some of our listeners may not know what Raynaud's syndrome is. Could you just briefly maybe tell what that symptom may be? Because that is pretty prevalent in lupus and other autoimmune conditions.
Sure. So it's a problem with the circulation to fingers and toes because those are our tiniest little appendices. So oftentimes it depends. If you are a darker skin tone, you may not notice the color change so much. If you're a lighter skin tone, you may see, oh, wow, my hands have really turned blue or white or bright red. It usually manifests that people find that they're very sensitive to cold and they really get very poor reactions when there's strong temperature changes to their hands and toes. Oftentimes winter time is a really tough time for people with Raynaud's. Did that explain it okay?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for the question. All right. So what organ systems are affected by lupus? I mentioned this briefly, very briefly before, but you can see it's almost everything. Your skin, your digestive system. Certainly people discuss joint and muscle pain, your nervous system, lungs, kidneys, eyes, memory issues. People mention brain fog, bones, and 40 to 45% of patients with lupus will have lupus affect their kidneys, nephritis. And that really is one of the means in which lupus can be dangerous for even younger people. And I say people, but generally women. So we have to be very mindful of monitoring kidneys and kidney function. So the leading causes of death for people with lupus, and I promise that this is the last of the doom and gloom. We will move on to what we can actually do about it. But 2 to 4 times the risk of death from cardiovascular disease is amongst people with lupus versus the general population of about the same age and gender. Lupus, people living with lupus also have an increased risk for fatal infections, oftentimes because we're on a lot of immunosuppressants. And then the last thing to be very cautious of, mindful of, to avoid, of course, is kidney failure. So if the lupus is affecting your kidneys, I've heard doctors say this time and time again, one kidney lupus flare is the only thing that's allowable. You cannot ever let someone that has lupus nephritis have another flare that affects their kidneys, because it's just too much damage. So obviously, if you had more than one flare, that's not ideal. But if you've had the one flare, please talk to your doctors about being really careful and making sure that you're safe and healthy. That's the goal. So enough of the negative. We know it. We can move on from it. We're aware. We don't have to dwell in it. But what can we do? What can we do on a daily basis to make sure that we're feeling good, we're keeping ourselves safe and healthy? So first and foremost, please see your doctors on a regular basis. If you have a doctor that is not your favorite and you feel like you're not communicating well, see another doctor. There are doctors out there. Obviously, try your best to make it work. But at the end of the day, if you feel like uncomfortable sharing your symptoms, or you feel like you're not being heard, then perhaps you do need to see another doctor. Whoever your doctor is, please be honest. Go in with your sheet of these are my symptoms lately. This is what I'm worried about. I've noticed a change here. Sometimes it may not seem such a big deal to you, but it could be giving your doctor a lot of helpful information. And certainly diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors are things that we can control very well. So definitely see your doctors, keep your appointments, get your blood work drawn, especially because lupus nephritis may not have so many obvious exterior or external symptoms, but the lupus could be affecting your kidney. So that's another reason for frequent blood work. Okay, nutrition. What do I do? So I've counseled thousands of people at this point in my life, and I love it. But oftentimes people will come to me and they are so overwhelmed. There's so much misinformation online. They heard from their cousin's best friend, oh, I should do this. So unfortunately, because everyone eats, sometimes it's easy to get some not so great information. I will say, in terms of big categories of what we're going to cover, if you are feeling mostly well and you feel like, lupus isn't so much of a concern for me, mostly I feel great, I don't have to worry about it, think about nutrition as a means to just keep you healthy long term. So reducing that risk of heart disease that people living with lupus have an increased risk for. If you are struggling with flares often, just changing the things that you're eating, changing your habits could be a way to reduce those flares and the disease activity. Excuse me. And then also we're going to talk about what to eat and what to avoid. Now, this is Nutrition 101 in terms of some real basic information, but really important to cover. So what are the macronutrients? What are we eating? Because you're looking at a food and it could have all three in there, but in general, these are the three macronutrients. So you've got your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Your carbohydrates could include grains, fruits, starchy vegetables, dairy, legumes. Now, your proteins, you may notice some overlap, as I mentioned. So dairy, here again, and legumes are also very high in protein, but they do have carbohydrates. Eggs, poultry, fish, meat, nuts, seeds. And then lastly, our fats are oils, animal fats, the dairy again, avocado, for example, and fatty fish all provide fat. So at any point, if you're struggling on what to eat, it is always a really good thing to just kind of fall back on of, does my meal or does my snack contain at least two of these three things? So that is just a really good way to make sure that you feel energetic for the day, or have that meal last you long enough until your next meal. But there are a million and one ways to combine these things. So that's usually where people get really overwhelmed. For example, so sometimes people say, well, I'll just have I don't know, let's say crackers for a snack. So that's kind of a one note song. You're only getting carbohydrates if you eat crackers. However, if you combine, let's say the crackers with a scoop of almond butter or peanut butter, now you've got like a nice little song, different notes going. So you've got carbohydrates and proteins and fats, and you'll feel much more satisfied for much longer with some combination of that. Now, the next slide is one of my favorite quotes out there that tries to simplify the confusing world of what to eat to something really, really concise. So Michael Pollan says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And what he's trying to say with that statement is eat food is try to stick with the unprocessed things that look like they came out of your garden, things that you can really identify, oh, that's what that is, without being told. Not too much, of course, we don't want our portions to be so big that we feel stuffed or uncomfortable, and mostly plants. So vegetables, fruits, legumes, have grains, whole grains, having the majority of your diet be something that came from a plant is also a good approach. Now, when we get to the details, you'll see how we can cater this specifically to people living with lupus. One thing I do want to say is that oftentimes people also feel like, oh, well, there's health food, and that's the only food that I can eat that's healthy, but definitely not. I have an example here of 3 healthy plates, and they are different cuisines, honoring different heritage of people. And all 3 of these could be very healthy options. What you see is it's following the magic formula. So 50% of the plate should be vegetables. If you like cooked vegetables, fantastic. Salads, wonderful. Soups, great. All raw vegetables, go for it. But you see here that you've got a multitude of options, and those can all provide the vitamins, nutrients, that can be really helpful for you. Now, 25% of the plate could be something like your starch, whether it's a grain. You could put the rice here. These show rice and tortillas. The beans are in this starchy section, but they could also, if you are a vegetarian or vegan, they could take the place of the 25% for the protein. And then you see here chicken, turkey, fish. That could be the protein parts of the plate. So do not feel as though you have to give away things that are near and dear to your heart or to your traditions or family history. Perhaps it's just changing the proportions of those things. Now, I put this here as kind of, people feel like they go to the grocery store and then they look at this and they say, what do I do with this information? I'm overwhelmed. So big, general, broad strokes. When you're looking at this nutrition facts label, and we will go into further detail, but I just wanted to like plant the little seed of, we will go back to this. Looking for things that you want to reduce would be things like saturated fats, trans fats, sodium, and sugars. Here only says total sugars. Sometimes they also say added sugars. The newer labels say that. Increase, the things on this label that you want to increase would be the unsaturated fats, the fiber, protein generally, although sometimes people overdo it with the protein, and then all these beautiful vitamins and minerals that are on the bottom. So the more that you can find those increase categories on your label, the better. And obviously, if you're holding something like peanut butter and sliced apples, they're different categories. So I would really focus on comparing 2 things that are very similar. So maybe you're holding peanut butter and almond butter, and then you can make a better comparison between the 2 and not feel super overwhelmed. So why do I bring up heart healthy choices? Great question. The reason I bring this up is because people living with lupus are at greater risk for developing heart disease, for having things like heart attack and stroke, and choosing the heart healthy choices way ahead of time is a fantastic way to make sure that you're reducing that risk. Unfortunately, lupus is just very inflammatory and it does affect our heart. So what can we do to prevent any additional things that make it worse? Number 1, definitely, is reducing your salt intake, being careful with that sodium part of the nutrition label is a really big deal. 70% of the salt or sodium that we consume is coming from processed foods. It's not coming from the salt shaker. So certainly be careful with the salt shaker. Don't over salt it. But more often than not, if you're preparing your foods from scratch, you're already taking off probably 1,000 milligrams of sodium compared to if it was already like a TV dinner. Fast food is super high in sodium. Just anything that's kind of pre-prepared or outside the home is going to be higher in sodium. So home cooked foods, keeping it simple and comparing. So like, let's say if you wanted to do something at home with a condiment like a soy sauce, just compare the two types of soy sauce. Okay, this one it's reduced sodium. It has maybe 500 milligrams of sodium. This one has 1,200 milligrams of sodium. Oh no, so I'll choose the lower. Also reducing intake of your red meat or processed meats. The charcuterie boards are very fun and wonderful for a party. Maybe just don't make it that often or don't eat that much from it. Avoiding trans fats, very important. They're often in our processed baked goods and in things like margarine. Thankfully, they are being removed from our food system because they are so bad for us. It really increases the risk of heart disease. And then the things that you do want to increase. So I won't just leave you with don't eat this, don't eat that. What to eat? Increase your intake of vegetables and fruits. The fresh produce is just so wonderful for us. It has a lot of phytochemicals and antioxidants. And then increase your healthy fats. So it's not that the omega-6s are awful, it's just that we often get too much of them. So try to increase the omega-3s and omega-9s, and then of course, definitely avoid the trans fats. Those are bad for us. Now, the next big thing in terms of nutrition that we want to talk about that affects everyone that lives in your home, all your loved ones, if you're eating together, is maintaining your stable blood sugars. So the reason for that is not only does maintaining stable blood sugars prevent weight gain, reduce inflammation in the body, also decreases your risk of being insulin resistant and diabetes, of course, is for people that are struggling with fatigue, having a sugar high and a crash will only make things worse. So having really stable blood sugars where you feel nourished throughout the day will help you feel more consistent in terms of your energy levels too. Also, oftentimes when we indulge in sugar, you're displacing things that would be more nutritious. So first things first, we have to know where the sugar is hiding. So look out for these names for sugar in the ingredient list. It could be brown sugar, or high fructose corn syrup, fruit juice concentrate, honey, malt sugar, anything ending in OSE, ose. So dextrose, fructose, glucose, like lactose, sucrose, and maltose. Syrup is another name for sugar. And now that we've figured out where they're hiding, certainly look at the nutrition label and the grams of sugar, but also just reduce intake of these categories. These are all going to be high sugar. Sodas, juices, sweetened coffees or teas, desserts, sweet snacks like those little strawberry shortcake things, anything kind of prepackaged, those honey buns, lots of sugar in those. Candy, hidden forms of sugar like condiments or nut butter. So they may just add sugar to make it taste a little bit better, but it's not even necessarily a sweet item. So what do we do instead? Drink a lot of water, please. Unsweetened tea, lightly sweetened or unsweetened coffee, fruit-based desserts. Like if you had made your own little apple crumble at home, you can control how much sugar you put in there, and then it could be much lower in sugar. It still tastes delicious, to be honest. Have snacks instead of the sweet stuff like nuts, seeds, vegetables with hummus or guacamole, and then look for the no sugar added versions of any of your condiments out there. So now we're back to the label. And again, so look for the sodium, look for the trans fats and added sugars. And then when you're comparing and contrasting two items, maybe something similar to this, instead of the 17 grams of sugar, has 5 grams of fiber and 5 grams of sugar. Oh, wow, this is a much better product for me. So keeping an eye out like that would be great. Now, these diets, oh man, they are so popular. I get questions about them day in and day out. And I am just going to give the quick pros and cons. So, ketogenic diet. I honestly would say this is not advisable unless you are a pediatric epileptic that is on the ketogenic diet to basically stop having seizures. The ketogenic diet is really not advisable for a long-term diet. I have seen people on it. It wreaks havoc on your cholesterol level. It really increases the risk for your heart disease, increases your blood pressure. Following it in a healthy way is really difficult, really difficult, because there's just so much fat that needs to get in. So a lot of people end up doing a lot of red meat and a lot of cheese, which is not great for us. And it's hard on your digestion too. And people get keto flu when they go on it. So I get a lot of questions. That's kind of my parting things. I could speak about it for a whole day if you'd like. I've done a lot of research on it, but we'll keep it to that for this setting. Now, the paleo diet is meant to be basically anything that could have been found. So your meat, your fish, your shellfish, your vegetables, your roots, your fruits and berries and eggs, but they don't include things like grains or dairy or legumes or sugar or salt. This could be done actually in quite a healthy way. However, it is a little bit it's a little bit lonely. If you want to eat with friends and family, you would have to just prepare all of the food. But this one, if you want to follow it, could be something that at least allows you to figure out if there are foods bothering you, because it's certainly very pared down. You're going to be avoiding all the processed foods. And if something is a trigger for you and your lupus symptoms, this could be a good way to figure out, hey, what was that food that was really bothering me? And then the last one is, I shortened it here to AIP diet, but it's autoimmune protocol. And it was created by a doctor actually to basically be a temporary elimination diet. You eliminate all the possible triggers for inflammation that they can think of: grains, nuts, seeds, dairy, nightshade vegetables, eggs, alcohol, certain peppers and spices and beans. But the key here, and this is why this would be what I recommend for people, is it is elimination to reintroduce. So you bring those foods back in. Obviously, if you have a reaction to one of those, I'm not bringing that in now. I figured out that that's not so great for me personally. But then you keep moving on and you reintroduce a lot of things. So it's definitely something out there. These are the three that I get the most questions about, so I wanted to speak briefly on them. The next slide, this one, is all about the foods that really turn out to be, in the people that I've seen, inflammatory, not only for people living with lupus, but just people. So the first couple are specific to lupus. The alfalfa sprouts is something that has just been shown to not be a good idea for people living with lupus. It can trigger a flare or not feeling well. Gluten and dairy are two things that really, for the autoimmune disease world of patients, are worth examining if you have a reaction to them. Again, it may not affect everyone, but give it a try. If you're really feeling ill all the time and just cannot seem to figure out what's going on, eliminate either one or both for, let's say, a month and reintroduce and see how you feel. Nightshade vegetables are a smaller subset of people, but some people are bothered by them. Those would be tomatoes, tomatillos, bell peppers, peppers that you would eat, like cayenne pepper as spices, eggplant, potatoes. Now this next couple foods grouping is really for everyone. Too much sugar is not great for it. It is inflammatory. Processed foods oftentimes are not that great for us. You're not getting the vitamins and the antioxidants and the phytochemicals that were originally in those foods. Preservatives or food coloring, specifically, there's one called tartrazine, yellow number 5, that is a derivative of one of the components that is in medications that cause drug-induced lupus. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you want to look out for yellow number 5, make sure it's not in something that you're eating on a constant basis. That's a good idea. The fried or charred foods, they really aren't good for anyone. basically that high heat and that either deep frying or the charring where things get blackened produce certain things that are not healthy. There's a strong question of, are they carcinogenic, which is causing cancer. And too much alcohol. We all know that's not good for anyone. Here and there, go for it. A glass of red wine could be good for your heart health, but not overdoing it. Now, what to include? We can include more vegetables and fruits. If you need to avoid the nightshade vegetables, that's fine. Fatty fish, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, especially things like ginger and turmeric, can be really amazing. Bone broth, gelatin, those include a lot of collagen. So if you have had things in the past that really irritated your gut and caused leaky gut, bone broth and collagen are really helpful in bringing that back to a healthy state, removing those basically gaps in the junctions. Probiotics and prebiotics, I'm sure y'all have seen plenty of supplements, but yogurt, kefir, kombucha are those probiotics. And then water. So there's a lot of options out there to buy, to drink, but water is really great, and we should all work on being hydrated too. All right, so the lifestyle choices that I'm going to really briefly go over, because I want to leave time for questions, of course, are the following: exercise, sleep, stress management, and environment. And these all play a really big role in how you feel. I usually give the analogy of healthy habits beget healthy habits. So it's like a train on tracks. Those, or cars, like a dirt road, where you see they've kind of gone really far into the ground, or the tracks, it's really easy to stay on the track once you're on it. So once you get the ball rolling on one side, you would actually have to like hop over, and it takes more effort to get to the other side. So let's say if you start implementing healthy habits and you realize, oh wow, I'm eating healthier, I feel more energy. Then you start exercising. Oh, I feel great. I've noticed that I have less pain and fatigue. It becomes so much easier to follow along that track. Now, unfortunately, life is tough. It throws us curveballs. Maybe it bumps us off that track and goes to the other track. Perhaps there was something very upsetting in the family, who knows? But then you notice, oh, I don't feel like exercising because I'm sad. I feel like eating cake. Oh, I feel really crappy after I ate that cake. I certainly don't feel like exercising now. And then you suddenly get the ball rolling there. So all I'm saying is that it's sometimes easy to stay in the same track. It takes a little oomph to get over to the other track. But once you're there, you may find, wow, it's really easy to keep up with these healthy habits. So don't feel discouraged if right now the track you're on isn't the one you want to be on. It is not impossible to get over. It just requires maybe collecting some habits that are healthier for you. So with exercise in general, start slow, but stay as consistent as possible. Certainly the pain, the joint, the swelling, that can make exercise feel really, really hard. However, if you can start with stretching, if you can start with walking, low impact things, you may notice a big, big difference in your energy and your pain. So they've done controlled studies where they take people with lupus, get them in an exercise program, and they do note reduced pain and fatigue. Excuse me. In addition to that, they notice that they sleep better. So then the next day they have more energy for exercise, because when you're tuckered out from exercise, you go to sleep more easily and sleep better quality sleep too. This could be anything. So walking, yoga, dancing, tai chi, swimming, stretching, whatever makes your heart sing, whatever you feel comfortable starting with, go for it. It's all great for your body. A lot of these are also really helpful in preventing osteoporosis and osteopenia, which is a big concern, especially for anybody that's been on prednisone for any kind of extended period of time. Prednisone is unfortunately terrible for our bone density. And lastly, of course, exercise improves your cardiovascular function and your health and your mood. You just feel better. Stress management. This is a big one. As I said before, our mind and our body is very attached So if you are stressed in your mind, your body doesn't feel so great, and vice versa. So certainly reduce the stressor if it's all possible. Set boundaries. If you have someone in your life that is really a negative influence, try to distance yourself from them. If you cannot distance yourself from them, have hard conversations about, I can only take on so much from you. Stress releases cortisol and adrenaline. Both of these are things that have detrimental effects to our body. So the adrenaline increases your heart rate, your blood pressure. Cortisol increases your appetite and contributes to that heart rate again, but also increased blood pressure and respiration. So it's great if we're running away from a wild animal. It is not great if this is just your constant. If you have a super stressful job, obviously don't just quit. I don't want you to also have the stress of financial difficulties, but try to find something else. Especially nowadays, there's so much remote work. I have talked to a lot of people with lupus that are finding things that they can do from their bed, from a computer on their bed, can give them the energy or the relaxation when they're feeling low energy because they don't have to get up and commute anywhere. Mindfulness, meditation, coping mechanisms. So if you're feeling really stressed, maybe go on a walk, take a bath, talk to a friend on the phone. There's other ones like writing down your thoughts helps give you clarity because it's on the page, it's not swirling around your brain. Try box breathing. Box breathing is breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then leave it out for 4 seconds. So start all over again. That can really help slow down that increased heart rate, increased respiration. And then practicing gratitude. I really love this one because even on a really crappy day, if you can figure out 3 things that you feel grateful for, it can really be a big mood changer. And at the end of the day, if we're alive, if we're moving, there's something to be grateful for, even if it's not something like, oh, I won the lottery, but something, the sun is shining, great. Okay, so sleep, obviously, also very important. Most adults need between 7 to 9 hours a night. If you are not one of those people, that's okay. Whatever it is that you fall asleep and you wake up feeling refreshed, fantastic. Obviously, with people living with lupus, fatigue is certainly a thing. So that may not be all the time, but whatever amount of sleep makes you feel best, great. Ways to make that sleep easier. So reducing your blue light exposure in the 30 to 60 minutes before bed. So that would be things like screens, TV screens, cell phone screens. If you can turn it off, fantastic. If you feel like, no, I can't turn it off, at least turn it to the setting where it's the warm light. It's usually like a night setting or night mode, and it turns all the blues more to orangey. So that is giving your brain less messages of like, stay awake forever. Set yourself a bedtime. Read a slow paced book, so maybe not the time for a murder mystery before bed, because then hopefully you're reading also with a warm light, and that will help you feel more tired and sleepy. Blackout curtains to reduce the light pollution either throughout the night or in the morning to let you sleep in a little bit. You can certainly use a white noise or a sound machine, and then set your thermometer to be a little bit cooler. It's certainly easy during the winter time to be in a cooler room, but that sometimes helps people sleep more deeply as well. And the last thing that we will talk about before we get to the Q&A are environmental factors. So we know that UV light is a trigger. I mentioned it way back in the beginning for not only the skin manifestations of lupus, but also fatigue, pain, the muscle and joint swelling and pain can be triggered by UV light. And it's not only sun, it could also be fluorescent light bulbs. And also talk to your doctor about if there's any new medications that you're on. Some of them sensitize people even further to UV light and to sun. So be careful with that. Infection, viral illnesses, colds can be a trigger to make your lupus worse. Surgery and injury, that trauma of physical, mental, emotional exhaustion. So that's why we talked about sleep, exposures to any chemicals or toxins or pollution. Personally, there's a couple things that if I eat, I get an immediate headache. So eventually you'll get to the point where you know your body so well of, oh, some people, for example, if they smell like a really strong perfume, they get an immediate headache. So I'm not saying this is going to turn into a lupus flare, but you start to realize what is not your body's favorite. And then unfortunately that the changes with pregnancy and delivery and postpartum are big hormonal shifts for everyone, but women living with lupus may then have more of an effect on their lupus symptoms. Thank you so much for your attention. I do want to leave this here. So this is me. Please connect with me. So follow me on social. If you go on my website, you can sign up to be an email subscriber. You'll get my blog post first. You can email me, please reach out. And just as was mentioned all the way at the beginning with Lauren, is that I will be starting a group program. It actually starts February 8th, so it's really coming up soon, on living well with lupus. And it's a weekly program where I talk to participants. We talk about everything: nutrition, lifestyle changes. I have a pharmacist to come to talk to about medications. I have a psychotherapist to talk about coping mechanisms and mindfulness. So it is going to be a fantastic class. With that group coaching, you also we have time at the end of every class to answer questions. You get unlimited email contact with me and a private support group. So this is the feedback that I've heard from so many people living with lupus, that this is a fantastic way to get that information out there and then also help people have the step-by-step guide to make all of those changes. So please, please, please reach out any which way you would like. I am happy to discuss further or explain anything. And then also I am happy to answer your questions right now.
Great. That was a wonderful presentation, Tanya. Thank you so much. And also, would you share that about your upcoming meeting with us, so we can share it with our patient community as well, on about February the 8th, because I think that would be very beneficial to all different types of patients, as we both connect to those types of patients every day. And we're going to roll into the Q&A. So again, our audience members can type in their questions in the question box below, and we're going to jump into this right quick.
Great.
So one of the things that you were talking about at the beginning is the prevalence of there's certain autoimmune conditions that coincide with lupus. What are some of the more prevalent conditions that you generally see with lupus patients?
Sure. I see a lot of Sjogren's, which is dry eyes, dry mouth. That seems to have a lot of overlap. Raynaud's has a lot of overlap. Fibromyalgia has a lot of overlap. But then I feel like I don't know the numbers, the statistics right off the top of my head, but those are definitely the ones I've heard the most. Then it really goes into like the wild west of autoimmune diseases. So unfortunately, I've heard nearly everything. Hashimoto's is definitely a common one, so sometimes there's overlap there. But people have really told me about all sorts of things. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
This is from, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. Shashia. Hi, my name is Shashia, or Sasha, I can't remember. I apologize for butchering that. I'm sorry. I have lupus for 23 years, since 18, and now I'm 40. So but bless this process, I'm a sweet person. Sadly, I gained 45 pounds during the pandemic. Is keto or any diet pill able to help me or be safe to use with a diet?
That's a great question. So I would be really careful with keto. Just as I mentioned before, it's It's a really extreme diet. It's very high in fat. It's very low in carbohydrates. It really limits the carbohydrates to below what we would recommend for people. And that's why people feel that keto flu. They don't feel so great because you're putting your body into a state of ketosis, which is kind of a rough state to be in. Our bodies are not used to it, and it's a transition for sure. So I would definitely talk to your doctors about that. I would not recommend weight loss pills and supplements as well. A lot of them are really dangerous. A lot of them aren't regulated. They're contaminated with things. I actually, during my clinical time when I worked in New York Presbyterian Hospital, I saw this poor woman come in with absolute liver failure because she had taken weight loss supplements, and they had something in there that maybe they weren't saying that was in there, and she passed away. So there's a lot of dangers to the, I guess, also the Wild West of supplements. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you brought that up, Tanya, because this is something I try to educate patients about all the time around vitamins and those type of pills that are not FDA regulated. They are not. And that includes vitamins. There are companies out there that will put anything in vitamins. So you really need to do the research and, you know,
pick a reputable. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Reputable. You're right there with me. Because most patients don't know these type of things, that they're not FDA regulated. So.
It is. It's really because they also put a bunch of claims. Like whoever's trying to sell you something will say, oh, it's been tested, blah, blah, blah. But it really needs to be a reputable brand. So there are brands out there that are getting third parties to verify that these ingredients that we say are in here. They're not contaminated with other things, that it's a safe choice. So definitely look for a brand that you recognize, that you feel like you can certainly do your research on. There's different little labels that are also markers of third parties reviewing the vitamins and supplements, but it's true. You definitely do not want to just get something, like order it online. You may be getting something completely different. I remember a study that I read, and it compared 10 vitamins that all said that they had the same things inside, and 8 of the 10 did not have what they said was in there.
And that's pretty common.
Yeah, it's really scary too.
It is very scary. And that's why I try to educate patients, just as you do, around that specific topic. The asker of that question says she's kind of down and depressed about all this, and that's why she was asking about recommended diets. But one of the things I wanted to suggest to this attendee was to join your group on February 8th.
Yes, please.
Because you have so many integrative and holistic therapeutic approaches, it sounds like.
Yeah. And you're not alone. You're not alone with these changes during the pandemic, the weight gain. You are 100% not alone. I've heard it be called, this is silly, but the COVID-19, as if you've gained, like the freshman 15, you've gained 19 pounds during COVID. It's silly, but you're not alone. The fact that they're making jokes means that it's happened to quite a lot of people, unfortunately. But also, I don't want to suggest anything that's just going to give you short-term and perhaps dangerous effects for your body. What you want, and I understand feeling upset about it too and feeling a little down, but the changes that you can make that you can live with for the rest of your life are the key, because then it's things that make you feel good in your body, make you healthier, and also are something that's manageable to do forever. So you don't have to have this crash diet, then you regain. Like that back and forth is also very bad for our metabolism. So please reach out to me. Obviously think about joining my group program, because that level of support is there. We take it step by step. Every week you're going to have practical things that you can take home and start that week to do, because it is those slow and steady changes, and also making it individual to you, like the foods that you like. But how can we do it in a way that's healthier for you to get your weight back to where you were before and have you feeling really good?
Thank you, Tanya. We have time for a couple more questions.
Of course.
Can you touch on the gluten dairy situation around autoimmune diseases and maybe help our audience understand there is a difference between a gluten and dairy sensitivity versus allergy versus
Yes.
types of flares, because I think there's a lot of confusion around that subject around gluten. When you hear gluten,
Yeah.
it gets thrown around a lot. Gluten free.
Yes. Yes. Very good question.
We could
I'm so
talk
glad
all
that we
day
can
on
talk
that, but
further.
we'll
I
try to make it.
can. Yes, I can. So the reason why those are things that are important to be cautious of if you have an autoimmune disease. One is that dairy for most of the world's population was not something that was traditionally in a diet, with the exception of a couple tribes throughout Africa and Northern Europe. Those were really the only people that domesticated cows really early and had dairy as part of their diet for generations and generations. Most of the rest of the world was not doing that with cows. So they just didn't develop the enzyme to digest dairy properly. And a lot of people have lactose intolerance. That's a sign. These are all like intolerances. If you have an allergy to dairy, then you will get an allergic response, which unfortunately for some could be that your throat closes or that you get into anaphylactic shock. But oftentimes people have either an intolerance, like lactose intolerance, or that it causes those basically kind of leaky gut syndrome. So it's irritating to your digestive system, besides like the gas and bloating, in a way that then causes inflammation. So gluten actually is another thing that we need to be careful with, because the gluten in the US has been modified. It is not necessarily the gluten that exists naturally from 2,000 years ago. Unfortunately, oftentimes it has been changed to either produce a higher yield crop or to produce more per square footage of the farm acreage. With those changes to the gluten, it seems to be very irritating for people with autoimmune diseases that are perhaps at a higher risk for some sort of intolerance. And that's that leaky gut again, where because our body isn't able to digest this protein, then we're essentially getting some of this outside of our digestive system. That causes a lot of inflammation. Really, at the end of the day, both the gluten and the dairy, there's enough of a prevalence of people with autoimmune diseases that do not tolerate these well, that I would say if you feel like you have any sort of autoimmune diseases and you're not feeling well, just trying to eliminate gluten and dairy for a short period of time, but kind of strictly. So short period of time being 3-4 weeks, but be strict about it, and then have a meal with a whole lot of dairy, a whole lot of gluten. See how you feel. If you feel fine, then completely disregard it. You're probably fine with gluten or dairy. If you feel really ill, that is perhaps something that's really a trigger for you. Again, I could talk about this forever, and I give me another hour, and we'll talk more about gluten and dairy. But those are kind of the big spark notes. Yeah, so definitely consider it if you're having a lot of symptoms of, hey, maybe I should eliminate this for a little while. But then the key is also reintroduce. I don't recommend for anyone that you be on a strict elimination diet for the rest of your life. That is not nutritionally complete. The whole idea is to find what bothers your individual body and then reintroduce all the other things that are not a bother.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and a great Q&A as well. And for being with us and volunteering your time to educate our community, Tanya, this evening.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you also touched on the integrated aspect, because that kind of rolls into our upcoming webinar on February 17th around horticulture therapy, actually. That can be beneficial to all types of patients living with chronic and acute illness. And that's going to be with certified horticulturist Bobby Maid on February 17th. And then our webinar after that is going to be with nurse practitioner Archie Sims on March the 1st around the urgent care and ER, when to go and what to know when you have to make those types of trips. Thank you to our audience for tuning in to this evening's presentation, and don't forget to register for those upcoming webinars. And please, if you don't mind, please take that just a moment and fill out that quick survey after the conclusion of today's webinar. And also, if you enjoyed today's presentation, please do consider making a tax-deductible donation to AAIDA on our website at www.godoaida.org. And your contribution also helps us with we're able to conduct educational events such as this evening's webinar, and is also a great resource for our patients and community. So again, we will have this recorded and up on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 to 48 hours. And thank you so much again, Tanya. I'm really looking forward to your meeting on February 8th as well, and being able to help you promote that, because you're going to be able to help so many more patients.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was wonderful. And thank you for all that attended, and we'll watch it in the future. Reach out. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
All right. Thank you. This is Lauren Dunlap for Advocacy and Awareness for Immune Disorders Association, and we hope you have a fantastic evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you.